Today's session is about nonprofit staffing, more specifically, employee classification. And essentially, it has to do with the nonprofit workforce. And in this session, you're going to learn what is a job classification and how do job classifications impact the nonprofit's bottom line. Also, you'll learn to understand how funders actually view the nonprofit workforce. For those of you who do not know who I am, my name is Amber Wynn and I'm a 30-year nonprofit veteran. I've done everything from emptying the trash to giving out over $7 million annually in grants. I've served as an executive director, a founder, a program administrator, a grant writer with my largest grant totaling $3.2 million. And I've worked in every sector, nonprofit, academia, government, and corporate. And in this session, I'll be talking to you from a funder's nonprofit experience. When we talk about the workforce and staffing, people tend to think of human resources. But today's focus is really going to come from a social capital lens. But when you think of human resources, you think of workforce, policy, culture, payroll, and liability. And from a human resources perspective, they do cover things like labor relations, employment law and ethics, talent management, employee rights and responsibilities, performance management and appraisal, workforce diversity, training and development, workers, jobs analysis, employee selection and recruitment, and things like creating remote workforces. We're not going to tackle that lane today. We're going to focus on human capital, which means investing in your talent, really specifically to increase your capacity as a leader. My primary focus is how to make work easy for you. Now, if you look at these three wheels, if you increase your capacity, then it should lead to your organizational growth and eventually sustainability. To increase your capacity, we need to focus on leadership, mission and strategy, program delivery, financial management, communications, technology, strategic relationships, and adaptability. My goal is to help increase your capacity in those areas. If you're successful, then you'll see growth in your leadership, the impact that your organization is making in your community. You'll see growth in fundability, visibility, streamlining processes, collaborations, and your organization's responsiveness to the community. If those things are accomplished, when we talk about sustainability, your organization should experience long-term sustainability, continuity in your programs, innovation, consistent outside funding. Those are the goals. When we talk about the nonprofit workforce, honestly, we're talking about you as a founder, because generally speaking, when you start a nonprofit, you don't have paid staff. This is the order that it usually goes. You'll have founders doing the work, board of directors initially doing the work of paid staff, until you're able to recruit volunteers. Some organizations use interns, but ultimately we want to get to the perspective where you have enough funding to actually hire and pay your employees. When we look at increasing your capacity or scaling quickly, you'll use independent contractors and consultants. Typically, though, you'll start off with volunteers. Volunteers are typically unpaid staff with generally low commitment. They require quite a bit of attention because you have to recruit them, you have to manage them, you have to get the work that they do to strategically align with your mission, and you have to create boundaries. It's a difference when you have paid employees versus volunteers. How a funder looks at volunteers, you would think that a funder would be excited that they get to save their money, right? And we have a lot of people who proudly boast, our money that we bring in goes directly to serve our clients. But there's something to be said about a volunteer-based organization. Volunteers can come and go when they please. They literally can say, I'm going to volunteer tomorrow and not show up. So a funder's perspective is, well, we're not so sure about a volunteer-driven organization, because where's the accountability? Also, if you have different volunteers coming in delivering programs, they're concerned about the continuity in the culture of the organization, the consistency in the delivering of the programs, and the safety if you have a youth program, volunteers coming in, right? But there is a solution. If you hire a paid volunteer coordinator, then you can accomplish those things that a funder is concerned about. For example, a paid volunteer coordinator will be responsible for managing your volunteers. Therefore, you have accountability. The coordinator will perform the outreach and the recruitment. They will deliver consistent orientation and onboarding. So, for example, if you say, we recruit volunteers, but we do orientation the third Thursday of every month, and then subsequently after that, we provide onboarding once a month. During that onboarding, we explain to them the mission, the values, the program, how the programs are operated, and they determine a level of commitment that they want to give to the organization. It may be 1 month, it may be 3 months, it may coincide with the school year, so it may be a semester, 2 semesters during the summer. But what makes it more acceptable for a funder is that you have a commitment, so that that volunteer isn't just showing up one day and then leaving the next. They've signed a contract for a length of time. And if you have training and you're monitoring and tracking your volunteers, a funder is going to feel more comfortable. If you're training them, that means that there's standardization. So their concern about consistency and continuity in the program is squashed. There'll be sign-in sheets where you can track the volunteers and you can track the clients. And then also you can align your volunteers with their skill set and with their passion, but it's standardized, so it's not nilly-willy where a volunteer comes in one day and delivers the program one way, and then another volunteer comes in the next day and delivers it a different way. If you're training them on how to deliver the program consistently, then there's continuity in the program. Also, when you have a paid volunteer coordinator, they would be responsible for administering background checks on the volunteers. So if you are a volunteer-based or volunteer-driven organization, my recommendation is that you have a volunteer program that is driven by a paid volunteer coordinator so that there's consistency in the delivery of the program. Many nonprofits use interns. Oh, we've gotten interns that's going to do X, Y, and Z. Well, an intern may or may not be paid, but most definitely they are temporary. Now, the intern is designed to receive educational benefits. A lot of times in our nonprofits, we'll have interns actually serving to replace a paid staff member, but that's not the design of an internship. For example, there are organizations that provide nonprofits with interns, like AmeriCorps or college programs. From the funder's perspective, an intern in any sector is limited in their area of expertise. Usually an intern comes into a company to learn, right? They're there to shadow an expert and to get lived experience. So if as a nonprofit you're saying that you have interns that are delivering your programs, a funder may question their level of expertise, continuity, and consistency in the program. If you do have interns, then my recommendation is that you provide them with project-based assignments. So let's just say if you're saying in your grant that you have interns, you can strengthen your proposal by saying that the intern is brought in to work on a specific project. With that, the intern is assigned to shadow or support paid staff. In that space, they are being trained and they are being monitored by that paid staff. Now, the reality is having an intern is going to help a paid staff member because They can give them specific projects that are going to, number one, help increase their capacity, but number two, help give the intern experience. You want to give them small projects that enhance their skills in their portfolio. So when they leave your organization for whatever time commitment that they have signed up for, they leave with a portfolio that demonstrates the new skills that they have learned working in your organization. The beautiful thing about an intern, and you can write this in your proposal, is that they've been exposed to your organization, your culture, to staff members, and potentially they could then come back and be hired. So if you're training your interns, providing them with institutional knowledge, giving them experience to a variety of job opportunities, you can then say that you're leveraging your internship programs to increase your hiring pipeline. The goal, though, is to have paid staff, right? Because paid staff members earn a wage or a salary. It comes with a job description. That job description clearly outlines what the job duties, the qualifications, and the expectations are, so that during the training and performance reviews, there's accountability. If you have a job description, then during the review, you can say, this is what you're supposed to be doing. With these job descriptions and the performance reviews, the employer also is able to create control because they are providing direction to the paid staff. If the paid staff is full-time, they may be eligible for benefits. Benefits tend to increase the loyalty and the consistency of an employee, but it also provides them with significant legal protections. The funder's perspective is that they prefer that nonprofits have paid staff because usually when you are recruiting for this position, in that job description, you're looking for someone with a certain level of expertise. And if they're getting paid a regular wage or salary, then there's accountability. This person is likely going to show up because they're expecting a paycheck. There's continuity and consistency in the program because this person is showing up every month to do their job, hence the pay every month. And because they're there, they're better able to be responsive to the needs of the community. Let's jump into classification. Classification is governed by the law. So from the federal level, you've got the Department of Labor. From the state level, you have the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Attorney General, and you also have employee versus independent contractors. You'll hear these terms a lot: exempt or non-exempt. Exempt is a person who receives a salary, so that's a set amount every month. Non-exempt are people who received wages hourly. For those people who receive hourly wages, they are eligible for overtime if you have them exceed the amount of time that they have been contracted to work. Exempt employees, those people who receive a salary, do not qualify for overtime. But there is a specific law in each one of your states. In California, it's Labor Code 226.8, and basically what it says is if an employer misclassifies an employee, they are liable and could receive a fine anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 for each violation. There is a labor code for each and every state that you reside in, and if you misclassify your employees, there is a fine. You've heard this FTE, full-time equivalent. When we talk about classification, you're looking at the total hours an employee works divided by the average annual hours worked full-time to determine the FTE. But basically, a part-time employee is an individual who it works under 32 hours, and they don't qualify for benefits. A full-time employee works 40 hours, and you are required as an employer to provide them with required benefits. And when we say benefits, I'm not talking about vacation, sick time, or dental, medical. I'm talking about the required benefits from the state. We'll talk about that in a minute. But for the hourly or non-exempt employee, they qualify for overtime pay. The exempt professional must customarily and regularly direct the work of 2 or more other employees. There have been occasions, and this falls in the line of misclassification, where a nonprofit may want to make a person exempt because they are racking up a lot of overtime. And so they'll say, oh, just make the person exempt, and then they'll get a salary, and then we don't have to pay them overtime. There are rules around that. In order for a person to be exempt, they must customarily and regularly direct the work of 2 or more other employees. So let's just say if you have, let's just say you have a security person and you have a lot of events and they've been working a lot of overtime. You can't just nilly-willy make them exempt so that you don't have to pay them overtime. There are rules, lots of rules. For example, for an exempt person, the rule is that they need to be of substantial importance to the management or operations of the business. So let's just say you have a person who's a maintenance person, and because you have a lot of events, you have the maintenance person working a lot of hours and then getting overtime. You can't just turn them into an exempt person because in terms of classification, they are not substantially important to the management of the business. Someone might say, well, yeah, they're important to the operations, but there are rules. So, for example, in California, in order for a person to be exempt, they need to be performing exempt level work for more than 50% of the time in the work week. So, for example, 50% of the time they need to be regularly directing the work of 2 or more other employees, and they must have the authority to hire or fire other employees. They need to be able to qualify for advancement and promotion and be responsible for making the change of a status of other employees. Also, the employee must customarily and regularly exercise discretion and independent judgment. So if you have a person who, for example, is responsible for maintenance, do they customarily and regularly exercise discretion and independent judgment? Typically not. They have the classrooms that they need to clean. They have certain times that they need to work. It's just set in stone. So there are rules and regulations around who can be considered exempt in management. I want to show you this org chart because this is really, really important for 2 reasons. Number one, if you are a director, then typically a director needs to have 2 managers that they are responsible for. If you are a manager, then typically you need to have 2 downline people that you are responsible for, whether that's a coordinator, a specialist, a supervisor, or whatever. The bottom line is, from a classification standpoint, and as nonprofits, we tend to give people really high titles because you want to honor them and you want them to feel important. So you'll make them the director of outreach, or you'll make them the director of development, or you'll make them the director of, engagement. If you have a director and that director is not managing 2 managers, then that's misclassification. If you have a manager and that person is not managing 2 direct reports, a coordinator, specialist, whatever the title, then that is misclassification. The second reason why I am imploring you to pay attention to the titles is because if you bring in people at a director title, then you need to bring them in at a director salary. So you have all of these directors. You can't bring them in at minimum wage. So if you bring in people at the beginning with director titles, you are going to blow your budget. It's important that you consider the longevity of your organization and fundraising. When you first started, you don't want to blow your budget. So hire people at the coordinator position. You can even give them steps. Coordinator 1, coordinator 3. You want them to grow in the organization, and then they will promote to a manager, and then you have a senior manager, right? So it's important to realize in terms of classifications that there are laws that govern the titles, and if you misclassify them, you may put in your organization in jeopardy when it comes to labor laws. Let's look at the difference between an independent contractor who would receive a 1099 versus a paid staff, which are typically W-2 employees. How do you determine if an employee is a W-2 or if they should be independent contractors? Quite often in the nonprofit sector, that decision is made based on your ability to pay. So, for example, an executive director will hire people as 1099 independent contractors so that they don't have to pay the required state taxes that come with a W-2 employee. Well, especially in California, but in other states as well, there's a checklist that you can use to determine whether or not an employee should be 1099 or W-2. So let's take a look at these questions. Number 1, will the worker be required to follow your instructions for when, where, and how to work? If the answer is yes, then they should be an employee. Will the worker need to perform tasks according to a sequence or a schedule you as the employer set? If the answer is yes, then that person should be a W-2 employee. Will the worker work on your premises or at a location you determine? If the answer is yes, then that person should be an employee. Will the worker use equipment, tools, materials, or supplies that you provide? Let's just say they're tutors and you send them out to an after-school program using your laptop. Then that means that that person should be an employee. Will the worker need to work during designated hours? That one is subject to discretion. As an independent contractor, you may be assigned to work at a specific site that only opens from 2 to 6. So that one depends. Will the worker be required to work full-time? If the answer is yes, then that person should be a W-2 employee. Is the work being performed integral to your regular business activities? In other words, does running your business depend on the work they'll be doing? If you have someone who's your outreach person or who's delivering your programs and you have them as a 1099 contractor, but that is your program, like you wouldn't have a program if you didn't have tutors or facilitators, then that person should be a W-2 employee. Is training required? Do you have to train them on your content, on your curriculum? Do you have to train them on how to deliver a program? If the answer is yes, then they would be considered a W-2 employee. Will the worker have an ongoing relationship with you? This question is debatable. You can have independent contractors and consultants that have long, ongoing relationships. So that one is iffy. Will you need the worker to submit reports about their activities? That too is negotiable. As an independent contractor and a consultant, an employer may require a report. So that one's not necessarily a determining one. Is the worker paid a fixed salary, on hourly wage, or on fixed rate per item produced? Those, again, debatable. As a consultant or independent contractor, it may, a wage or a fixed rate might be negotiated. Do you control how and when the worker gets paid? Again, that one's negotiable. As an independent contractor, the employer may say, okay, we're going to pay you net 30. Is the worker allowed to work for multiple companies at once? This is a huge, huge one. If you have an independent contractor, but they're only allowed to work for you, then they should be an employee. However, if the individual is able to work for other employees or contractors, then that means that they then could be considered an independent contractor. Are the worker services unavailable to the general public? This one is huge as well. As a consultant, for example, my services are available to the general public. I may be working on a contract with a particular employer, but I also can take on additional work with the general public. If your independent contractors can only work with you and they're not able to work with other people, then they should be considered W-2 employees. Can you fire the worker without cause? And can the worker quit at any time? With most employees, they are at will. And so if you can fire them without cause, that's not the case typically with the consultant. You have this agreement and within 30 days and things of that nature. So these are some of the questions you want to ask yourself. It's not okay for you just to determine that you no longer want to pay the required taxes and insurance of an employee. It has to meet this qualification. An independent contractor is someone who is self-employed. They don't work regularly and they specialize in a trade or profession. You may hire a person as a 1099 independent contractor, but if they don't meet this criteria, then they should be a W-2 employee. From a funder's perspective, if all of your workforce are 1099 employees, they are going to consider the culture. The definition of a 1099 contractor is that they're self-employed and they don't work with you regularly. So what's the culture of your organization if everyone's staffed there, or the majority of them staffed there, can come and go as they please? What about the continuity and consistency in the delivery of your program? If you have paid staff members, you're going to create a culture. They're going to establish relationships both with the community and with your client base. But if they are independent contractors, then that may not be the case. How do you determine if a person should be an independent contractor? Well, here's a checklist. The independent contractor pays self-employment taxes. So they pay for their own Social Security and Medicare. They are trained in their profession. This one is huge. Sometimes people will hire people as independent contractors and they will pay them minimum wage or slightly above it. A person who is trained in their profession typically are going to have higher rates. So for example, I'm trained in my profession. I am considered a nonprofit consultant. You wouldn't hire me as a 1099 person who's just going to do just your basic regular everyday work. As an independent contractor, that person can work with many employers at one time, have different clients. The independent contractor controls when, how, and where the work is done. You will negotiate the deliverables with the employer, but as an independent contractor, you determine when, how, and where the work is done. The independent contractor negotiates their rates based on the per job basis, and they own their own tools and equipment to perform the work. An independent contractor does not receive employee benefits, and they work on a profit loss basis, and they do not receive overtime pay. As a consultant, you would engage with them because they're someone who has an expert or professional level of engagement. Typically, a consultant is going to help you scale or accomplish your goals much faster because they have that high level of expertise or professionalism. It's usually going to be project-based or specialized work. So maybe they're going to deliver a product, or they're going to do a project that's going to move your organization forward. The consultant is very flexible. They don't receive any benefits or taxes. They do have control and are receiving direction from the employer because the employer brought them in to achieve a specific goal. They're not eligible for benefits, and the hiring party is not liable to others for the acts or omissions of the consultant. Consultants typically have what's called errors and omissions insurance because as a person with expertise, you're giving out advice. And if you're working with the employer's clientele, they will not accept responsibility for something that you said that's incorrect. That is really something that a consultant has to cover. A consultant typically holds a degree, a license, or specialized certification. Now, depending on how you engage with the employer, the consultant could be a W-2, but more than likely they're going to be a 1099 contractor. When we talk about employees, it's important for you to understand that compensation in a nonprofit is synonymous to value, right? You get what you pay for. So if you want effective leadership, you want a person who can come in and do strategic planning, you get what you pay for. For example, if you want an innovative, high caliber program, if you bring in someone and you pay them minimum wage, there's a high likelihood you won't get that. However, if you pay someone for their experience and their expertise, then there's a higher likelihood that you're going to get what you pay for. But the reality in a nonprofit, especially in a startup nonprofit, is you can only afford so much. That's understandable. What you should go in thinking, you're going to do well until you can do better. You're going to pay your people minimum wage until you can pay them more. What you don't want to do is facilitate this culture of low pay, because with low pay comes low skills, and with low skills comes low outcomes. You want to create a balanced work life, right? That means that your people are going to obtain more knowledge, and when they obtain more knowledge, then you pay them more. At the end of the day, there are a variety of ways of compensating your people. You can pay them through wages, which is hourly, which would be non-exempt, salaries, which typically is biweekly or monthly, and that is exempt. You can pay fees. For example, if you engage a person to serve as a facilitator, then they may charge you a fee for that. You can pay like your tutors a stipend. That means they're reoccurring. An honorarium is what you would give to a person who has a high level of expertise and they show up one time. That may be a keynote speaker, that may be a guest speaker. You may offer someone a donation or a gift. You can also pay someone on commission. For example, if there's a person who is writing your corporate sponsorships, your corporate sponsorship packages, you can say to them, okay, this is marketing money, it's unrestricted money. You get 20% of whatever you bring into the organization. And then you can offer bonuses. Say, for example, if you're not able to provide your staff with cost of living increases or merit increases, you may want to give them a bonus at the end of the year, a holiday bonus. So these are ways that you can actually compensate your staff. When you have W-2 employees, there are some mandatory benefits. When people hear fringe benefits, they typically think of benefits like dental, medical, sick, and vacation. However, when you have a W-2 employee, there are some benefits that are required, like Social Security benefits and workers' compensation benefits. You have final wage payments. But in the scope of employee benefits, they can run the range of FMLA, family benefits. If a person is pregnant or their spouse is pregnant, then they are giving those certain type of benefits where they can stay at home for a while. Pregnancy, disability leave, paid sick leave, holidays, and vacations. These are all employee benefits that an employee may be eligible for. So that's nonprofit staffing and employee classification. What we covered during this session is what is a job classification and how it impacts nonprofits and how it can potentially impact a nonprofit's bottom line. Also, how funders view the nonprofit workforce. Thank you for joining us today.